Hello, guys. Good morning. Today, on this snowy day in April, as Old Man Winter is reminding us that we live in the Chicagoland area. I guess on a brighter note, it's not 5.5 inches that we got last year at this time. And then to couple that, there was another snowstorm in late April, if you can remember, that dropped 2.5 inches on us. So hopefully we won't get that, and spring will come quick or soon enough. But I guess the groundhog was right again this year. So we are going to go through this DBQ, and you have to remember that as you break down this DBQ, you have to argue something. Okay, it's an argumentative essay. It's expository writing. So you want to have that in your head as you start to break down this DBQ. It's really important that way. So let's take a look at the question first, and then we'll move forward. Okay, guys, for the question, remember the most important thing you're going to do is read that question until you know you understand it. So this is how the question reads. Evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the rising tensions between the American colonists and the British government between the period 1754 to 1776. Let's reread that question one more time and break it down even more. Evaluate the relative importance of the different causes. This is a cause and effect archetype essay. But also it's asking us to pretty much rank the relative importance of the causes to what we know with these periods, the time 1754 to 1776, Revolutionary War America. So when we look at those periods, the time period 1754 to 1776, 1754 is the start of the French and Indian War. Remember, this war was fought with the two sides of the French and the Native American forces predominantly, and then you had a smattering of Native American forces that was paired up with the American colonists, British colonists, and obviously the Redcoats at the time, the British Army. As we fought against the French and the majority of Native American forces for American colonial rights. So you have the Revolutionary War time, and they're asking you to get the causes. What led up to the increased tensions? What led up to the Revolutionary War? So you have to think from that perspective. Remember, argument. Think about relative importance, that word. Again, ranking those causes from least important to most important. And in this case, remember, you're going to have only two main body paragraphs. So your first main body paragraph is that counter-argument paragraph. And it's not truly always this counter-argument. In this case, it's just the one that you feel is least important, the cause. And then you obviously have your most important cause. So the next thing you want to start doing is think about the causes, right? The most important causes or causes, any causes to the American Revolution. Just brainstorm those as quickly as you can. Okay, so you can see on the screen, I have my causes listed here. So you have salutary neglect, the period where America was left alone for self-rule and self-government, and they were able to create their own laws, pretty much free from the king or British Parliament. But things start to change in the late 1600s. You have navigation acts that were created in the Dominion of New England and a new governor that was imposed. Now, this was a short stretch. It was only 3 years in 1680s, and he's out by 1689, Governor Andros. But it does show you, again, the first attempt, and Americans started to smuggle at that point in time. And then as you move forward, you have that period after that, known as salutary neglect, where Americans could go back to normalcy in a sense and create their own governments and do those things. So the French and Indian War will come in 1754. That's, again, the period, obviously, where this question begins. And then you have British war debt from that, which you have another round of tariffs and duties that are going to come to pay off that war debt. And then you also have the presence of redcoats and smuggling. That is, again, what I have on that list. Now, remember, there could be several other things here, but you're just quickly brainstorming. But those are the main ones. And I already kind of have an idea of where I want to go. By looking at this right now, my causes, and just thinking out loud, the causes to the American Revolution, the two things that come to mind are obviously the taxes, the tariffs that are going to be put on Americans that they feel is unfair because they don't have representation in Parliament. But the other bigger issue that I can see is the presence of redcoats, the feeling of walking out of your door and seeing redcoats everywhere in the town of Boston, make Boston the hotbed for this revolution. It is going to change the way that they think. They always feel that they're being watched, and truthfully, they pretty much are. So that is going to kind of be where I think I'm going. But then you got to look at those documents. And you got to break down those documents. And that's what we're going to do next. Before I get to how I broke down these documents, I want to make an important note. Guys, as you get these documents, remember, these are primary and secondary sources. So it's really important that you note that in your head. And you also want to think about, again, there are two sides to every historical debate or argument. And in this case, you can start to see the shaping of the British and the American forces and what's happening there. So keep that in mind, because that perspective plays a role in what you're going to read and what those people are saying. This applies to the happy statements that you guys have to make. Remember, there are going to be times where you're going to have to apply that for 3 that I want you to, right? So you can gain your full points. But anyway, keep that in mind as you work through this. Remember, secondary sources are going to come later after the period. It's people looking back on that history, writing about it. And then your primary sources are going to come into play, during that period. So just make sure that you're paying attention to that. In looking at the documents, I see an obvious pattern that emerges here, and it fits into my argument. So my argument is going to be that the least impactful cause to the rising tensions of the American Revolution were the taxes themselves. And that, the taxes had been imposed in the late 1600s, and it didn't cause war then, and it surely wasn't going to cause war at this point in time. What did really increase the tensions? Remember, that's what they're asking you to evaluate. The relative importance of the causes to the rising tensions. What really made tensions increase was the British military presence that was around Boston area after the Revolutionary War. I mean, they had to be there to collect taxes from the Boston Harbor. And remember, taxes were coming in imports from Britain. And so that's where they're going to come in through those British imports through Boston, and then they're going to circulate their way throughout the colony. And guys, these taxes, they were taxing American colonists on just about everything. Now, the taxes themselves were relatively low, especially in comparison to the other British colonies and the British citizens themselves that were living inside of Great Britain. They had much, much higher taxes, as you guys know, as we went through. But when you start to think about it, the thing that really makes the difference is the British soldiers' presence. It increases the tensions. There's skirmishes that constantly break out, fights that break out, fist fights, melees, those types of things that occur. So that is where I'm going to shape my documents into the argument. I thought of that, but then you have to go through the documents to make sure that it fits there, and it does. And so I'm going to start with the counter argument paragraph, and I'll show you what documents I can fit into that. Remember, for my counter argument paragraph, I want to use 2 documents. For my main argument paragraph, I want to use 3 documents. That's where you want to fit into that format still. So for documents 1 and 2, those are the 2 documents that I can fit into my counter argument paragraph. And in this case, remember, it's going to be this cause is the least effective or impactful. And in this case, it is going to be the idea of tariffs. And those 2 documents fit right in the tariffs. One is talking about the North Carolina Gazette. It says it was written in 1765. So we know this took place, obviously, in North Carolina. We have a primary document here that says that the Americans were protesting the stamp duty. Well, this is the Stamp Act, actually, of 1765. And this is where you guys can pick up that outside evidence. It doesn't say Stamp Act. So there you go. You can bring that part in, and that would be a way to bring in the actual outside evidence. They were burning an effigy of a tax collector. This was done quite often. Remember, they would harass the tax collectors in the American colonies. The American colonists themselves would, in frustration to having to pay these taxes. So this is from an American perspective, and that's important to recognize too. So this is kind of where the HAP comes in, right? Because this tells us why these people would feel the way that they did. And we know that they were frustrated by the Stamp Act and that they were protesting. We also know that the king repealed the Stamp Act. So there you go again, where you have that outside evidence that you can bring in because the Americans were protesting. So that's document one. Document two, British Parliament. You have written in 1767, the British Parliament is like their version of Congress. They are creating a law allowing for the British government to tax Americans for a number of imports from Britain. And they have a list there. And you can see, guys, they're trying to tax things that Americans are using because that's how they're going to make money to pay off the debt from the French and Indian War, otherwise known as the 7 Years' War. So this is where you could see that as you're building your case, building your argument that these taxes were imposed, Americans were protesting. They were going through, in a sense, peaceful ways to protest these. This is known, 1767, were known as the Townshend Acts. These came in, again, after the Stamp Act, after the king repealed these. And we also know that these tariffs, the Townshend Acts, will be repealed again, and you'll start to see this process of the king kind of giving in to the Americans, but then having to obviously go through the process of imposing these taxes once again because they have to pay down this debt. So that is where you guys can start to kind of structure that counter argument paragraph. Again, tariffs being the least impactful part. Now let's go through the other three documents. And guys, you have to understand, this is not typically how they shake out, where you have the first two goes with this one and the next three go with this one. And don't do that. Usually it shows that you didn't understand the documents. In this case, it actually fits perfectly. It just happened that way, where 1 and 2 fit in paragraph, your first main body paragraph, and 3, 4, and 5 are going to fit into my final paragraph. And I'll get to show you how I did that too. Okay, so for these documents 3, 4, and 5, as you go through and break these down, you want to obviously go through the same process. But what I have for the first one, 1770, bloody massacre. Document 3 here. This was done by Paul Revere. You can actually see it, and his name is written at the bottom. And this is obviously an American perspective. We know this because the American Bostonians are standing there, unaware, defenseless, as the British soldiers are firing their weapons upon them. This was propaganda that's going to be used by the Sons of Liberty even to unite the American colonies. So as you guys start to think about that, that's, again, another way to earn outside evidence right there, the Sons of Liberty. Again, not mentioned. Paul Revere being a part of that. And this document was the bloody massacre. This picture was spread around the American colonies to rile up the colonists to get behind the Revolutionary War effort into back Boston, and taking major steps towards revolution. And it worked. It was a masterful piece of propaganda. But the other thing that you can talk about too, even these protests, much like what was being done with the Boston Massacre, you also had like the Boston Tea Party. And that's going to come in 1774. And so these protests aren't just going to go away. Americans, the tensions continue to rise, especially as the military presence becomes more and more apparent to the Boston people and the American colonists. you have tensions increasing. The king then starts sending in more soldiers, and what those soldiers are able to do starts becoming more and more intrusive into the everyday American lives. So, document 4. This is General Thomas Gage. These are orders to attack, in a sense, not attack, but to take out the munitions areas and storage areas of the people outside of Boston, Lexington, and Concord. And remember, you had the Minutemen. You learned about them as kids. Again, another way to get outside evidence there. Minutemen who would practice marching around, and the king knew that these guys were up to no good and who they're preparing the fight. I mean, it's pretty obvious. They're marching around for a reason. They're getting ready for war. What war? Obviously, the war that they want to try to lead against the British forces. And so you have the Battle of Lexington and Concord that's going to take place as these men try to go in and take out these munitions storage areas. A skirmish breaks out. And this was the shot heard around the world. Again, all of these things, you can get outside evidence points where Battle of Lexington and Concord was not directly mentioned. You have the shot heard around the world, what it's dubbed as, right? All of those things start to come out at this time. But this is not the only skirmish that breaks out, because it inspires other ones, like a much larger skirmish and darn near battle between American forces and British forces before the war even officially began, and that is Bunker Hill. So we start to see these things, and it's pretty apparent. Bunker Hill happened shortly after, months after the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Document 5. How I'm using the Declaration of Independence, and this is obviously written by the Second Continental Congress. Remember, these are American politicians who are making a list of grievances that they had towards the king and British Parliament for why they're breaking up. It's a breakup letter, why they're breaking up with the British crown and the king. And if you look at those grievances, the majority of them, okay, the overwhelming majority of those grievances are military related, meaning that the British redcoats and their presence, they're related to that. And you know, as you go through that list, you start to see, yeah, this makes sense. And this is how this essay is going to come together, right? Now, remember, you can mix up these documents any way that you want. Please try not to put them in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It just doesn't look good. So mix them up. Even if you have documents 3, 4, and 5 in your second paragraph, doesn't mean you need to put them in order 3, 4, and 5. Make it 4, 3, 5, or whatever the case is, right? But use them how they fit. Use them how they're going to work, okay? And that's how you're going to start structuring your main body paragraphs. Tomorrow, we're going to get into that, and I'm going to talk about that right now. Okay, so remember, I want you to use this video as kind of like your answer key. Go through, how did you break down those documents? Were you coming to the same conclusions? And remember, guys, your argument doesn't have to be the same as mine, and it shouldn't. It should be your argument, what you come up with. There's multiple different ways to argue this prompt. But remember, you have to have an argument. You're not just writing about history. You're arguing about history. And if you don't do that, your essay itself is going to fall flat. So please be sure that as you go through, you are taking the time to compare the two. But tomorrow, what I want you to do is start out writing your counter argument paragraph. Okay, so that's the last thing we're going to do this week. Your assignment tomorrow is going to simply be write your counter argument paragraph. Your assignment today, obviously, is just to check your work. Use what I've gone through, what you're looking at. Where are you going with this essay? Can you change? Absolutely you can. If you were on the wrong path and you know it now, if you misinterpreted a document, change it. It's not too late, okay? And go that route. Remember, it's yesterday's assignment. It's not like I'm holding you to that. It's just for me to make sure that you guys are doing the work of breaking this down. Other than that, you can go any way you want. Friday, again, is going to be kind of our day to celebrate, to move forward, and to do some fun things. And so I got a couple for you too, and I think you'll really like it. Our contest is going to come back on Friday too. So you guys have a wonderful day. Hopefully the sun melts all the snow outside, and we can get to the spring. Have a good day, guys.